Welcome to Readings in English. Here, we believe that learning English can be both enriching and deeply engaging. The English language opens doors to new cultures, stories, and perspectives, offering a unique way to connect with the world. Through our captivating stories, you'll not only improve your language skills, but also dive into a range of emotions, lessons, and adventures that make learning truly memorable. Today's story takes us on a journey with Maria, a young woman venturing to the United States on her first solo trip. With limited English, Maria faces the challenge of navigating a new culture and language, finding both obstacles and unexpected kindness along the way. As her courage grows, she discovers that learning a language is about more than just words. It's about connecting, persevering, and finding your own path in a vast world. So get comfortable and let's begin Maria's story together. Maria's heart raced with anticipation as the plane touched down. She gripped her seatbelt tightly, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness about her first solo trip to the United States. She glanced out of the window, her eyes scanning the sprawling city below. The buildings stretched endlessly toward the horizon, their glass facades reflecting the vibrant lights of the evening. Maria's English was basic, barely enough to get by, but she had dreamed of this moment since childhood. The promise of independence and adventure tugged her out of her comfort zone, pulling her toward a place she had only seen in movies. As she exited the airport, the busy sounds of honking taxis and hurried conversations in English swirled around her. Maria clutched her luggage, navigating through the sea of people as best as she could. The words on the signs were familiar yet elusive, like half-remembered songs. She recognized a few: exit, welcome, baggage, but the majority felt alien, making her feel small and uncertain. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she was here to learn, to prove that she could handle this world on her own. After managing to hail a taxi, Maria settled into the back seat, eyes fixed on the city whizzing by. Her driver, a man with a friendly but rushed demeanor, asked her several questions. She could understand bits and pieces, but the rapid pace left her flustered. Hotel, she managed to say, hoping he understood. She handed him the written address, grateful she had thought to prepare it in advance. When they arrived at her hotel, Maria checked in, nodding along to the receptionist's instructions. She caught phrases like breakfast in the lobby and checkout at noon, enough to piece together the essentials. In her room, she unpacked and sat on the bed, feeling the weight of the day settle over her. The thrill of the journey had carried her this far, but now, alone and surrounded by a language that felt like a thick wall, a pang of homesickness crept in. She brushed it aside, promising herself that this was only the beginning. With a sense of purpose, Maria lay down, determined to explore the city the next day. Sleep came in fragments, her mind racing with English phrases she would need, rehearsing words she barely understood. Her dreams were filled with neon signs and unfamiliar faces, all of them speaking words she couldn't quite decipher. The next morning, Maria woke, the sunlight streaming through the hotel curtains. She dressed quickly, excitement bubbling up as she reminded herself of the places she wanted to see. With a small notebook in hand, filled with phrases she had practiced before the trip, she stepped out of the hotel and into the heart of the city. The streets were already bustling, the sounds of the city filling her ears. People moved with purpose, weaving through the sidewalks, talking on their phones, laughing with friends. Maria felt like an observer in a fast-paced world, one she was not yet a part of. She tried to mimic their confidence, but with every step, she felt the weight of her unfamiliarity. Each shop, each street vendor, each sign seemed to shout in English, reminding her of her limited understanding. She wandered into a cafe for breakfast, the smell of coffee and pastries a welcome comfort. Approaching the counter, Maria opened her notebook, ready to place her order. The barista, a young woman with a warm smile, greeted her with a friendly good morning. "What can I get for you?" Maria froze, her carefully rehearsed phrase suddenly seeming inadequate. The barista's tone was patient, and Maria managed to stammer out, "Coffee, please," and "croissant." The barista smiled, nodding as if Maria's hesitant English was perfectly natural. She handed Maria her coffee and croissant, and Maria found a seat by the window, savoring the first sip. Outside, she watched the steady stream of people, feeling a mixture of admiration and isolation. They seemed so at ease, so comfortable in their language and routines. She, on the other hand, felt as if she were standing outside a door, trying to find the right key to enter. After breakfast, Maria ventured into a nearby park. Children played while parents chatted nearby, laughter and conversations filling the air. She passed a group of tourists speaking English rapidly, each word a blur. Though she wanted to ask them for directions to her next stop, she hesitated, intimidated by her own limitations. She walked on, her resolve starting to waver as she realized how much the language barrier isolated her from even the simplest interactions. As she continued through the city, Maria stopped periodically to check her map, her notebook a constant companion. She began to feel her confidence slipping, her excitement dulled by the loneliness creeping in. This city, so alive and vibrant, felt like it was moving past her, leaving her behind. She wanted to connect, to belong, but each attempt left her feeling smaller, more uncertain. She found herself at a busy intersection, watching people rush past with purpose. Their lives moved forward, while hers felt stalled, trapped behind an invisible wall of language. Maria took a deep breath, her hand clutching the edge of her notebook. This was only her first day. She reminded herself there would be many more chances to learn, to understand, to find her way. But for now, she felt adrift, a stranger in a city that spoke a language she barely knew. Maria's second day in the city started with newfound determination. She woke up early, reviewed her notebook of phrases, and made a plan to visit a popular museum across town. She had marked the route on her phone's GPS and felt a surge of confidence. She stepped out of the hotel. Her nerves were still there, but she reminded herself that she was capable and prepared for this adventure. However, as she reached the subway station and descended into its labyrinth of platforms, the signs and announcements blurred together, each one more confusing than the last. After a few wrong turns and increasingly fast-paced English announcements that she couldn't decipher, she found herself on an unfamiliar platform. Her heart began to pound as the realization sank in. She was lost. A sinking feeling took hold when she reached for her phone, only to see a blank screen. Her battery had died without her noticing. Maria looked around, her panic rising as she imagined herself wandering the city aimlessly. The confidence she had felt that morning faded quickly, replaced by a sense of helplessness. Without her phone, her map, or anyone she knew, she felt truly alone. Determined not to give in to fear, Maria tried to retrace her steps. The crowds seemed thicker, each face blurring into the next as she struggled to read the unfamiliar signs. She approached a transit employee, managing to stammer out, Where is museum?" The woman, though well-meaning, responded quickly in English, her instructions a jumble of words that Maria couldn't grasp. She caught snippets, uptown, transferette, but nothing stuck. Maria thanked her weakly, her voice barely audible. Embarrassment crept over her as she realized how visible her confusion was to everyone around her. Taking a deep breath, Maria left the subway station, hoping she might recognize some part of the city above ground. She found herself in a crowded neighborhood she didn't recognize, the towering buildings making her feel even smaller. The cheerful chatter of people walking by seemed to taunt her, each person so comfortable, so at ease. The day she had hoped would be filled with excitement and exploration now felt daunting and isolating. After wandering for what felt like hours, Maria stumbled upon a small park and found a bench. She sat down, burying her face in her hands. Her thoughts swirled with frustration, embarrassment, and doubt. How could she be so unprepared? This was supposed to be her moment of independence, yet here she was, a tourist lost and unable to ask for help. As she sat there, Maria noticed a couple on a nearby bench speaking in a language she didn't understand. They seemed relaxed, smiling as they chatted. It reminded her of home, where she could converse freely, expressing herself fully. Here, even the most basic phrases eluded her. She felt like a child learning to walk all over again, stumbling with each step. After a few minutes of gathering her thoughts, Maria stood up, resolved to keep trying. The frustration had reached a peak, and she realized that sitting in the park, feeling sorry for herself, would solve nothing. She knew she needed to ask for help, but each failed attempt had left her more hesitant, the language barrier now feeling like a solid wall between her and the people around her. She approached a group of young people, hoping they might be patient. "Excuse me," she began, her voice uncertain. "I am lost. Can you help?" She looked at their faces, hopeful, but they exchanged glances, their own confusion apparent. One of them said something quickly, pointing down the street, but the words slipped away from her understanding. She nodded and moved on, her cheeks burning with the shame of yet another failed attempt. In the hours that followed, Maria tried several more times to ask strangers for directions, her notebook clutched tightly in her hands. She managed a few brief exchanges, picking up on words like left hand, right, but nothing concrete enough to guide her. The city felt more foreign with each passing moment, her confidence sinking deeper with each unsuccessful attempt. Finally, she found herself outside a small cafe, its warm light spilling onto the street. She hesitated, then decided to go inside, driven by the need to escape the bustling sidewalks and her own frustration. The cafe was cozy, with mismatched chairs and books lining the walls. She approached the counter, hoping this time might be different. The barista, a young man with a kind face, greeted her, "Hello. What can I get for you?" he asked, his tone friendly and casual. Maria hesitated, realizing she didn't even know how to explain that she needed directions. "Coffee, please," she said softly, feeling foolish. The barista smiled and prepared her order, placing the steaming cup on the counter. As she took her first sip, Maria noticed a map of the city on the cafe wall. She approached it, studying the lines and landmarks. Her mind raced as she tried to connect it with her memories of where she had been. She sensed someone watching her and turned to see the barista observing her with curiosity. "Are you lost?" he asked gently, and Maria's relief was immediate. She nodded, struggling to find the words. "Hotel. I am lost. I don't know." "Where?" she managed, pointing at the map. The barista nodded, understanding her halting explanation. "Okay, let me see if I can help," he replied, pulling a small notepad from his pocket. He began writing directions in simple terms, adding small sketches to guide her. He spoke slowly, his words chosen carefully so she could follow along. Maria's heart swelled with gratitude as she watched him draw a basic map. He handed her the notepad, his expression warm and reassuring. "Go here," he said, pointing to the first spot on the page. "Then take a left, and you'll find the hotel a few blocks down." She nodded, repeating the directions to herself, committing them to memory. For the first time that day, she felt a glimmer of hope. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. As she left the cafe, Maria's steps were steadier, her confidence slowly returning. She held the notepad tightly, repeating the directions in her head as she walked. Each street brought her closer to familiarity, and the looming feeling of helplessness began to dissipate. Though she wasn't home yet, Maria felt a renewed sense of determination. Her journey was far from over, but this small victory brought a quiet strength. She realized that each attempt, each small interaction, was helping her break down the wall separating her from this world. And perhaps, she thought, it was through these very struggles that she would find her own path. Maria's next steps felt lighter, as if the weight of her initial struggles had eased just slightly. She held the barista's directions like a lifeline, carefully following each step as she navigated her way through the unfamiliar streets. While the road was still new and challenging, she felt a growing confidence, a quiet belief that maybe she could make it on her own. As she rounded a corner, Maria noticed a small cafe tucked between two buildings. It looked different from the others, warmer somehow, with soft lights illuminating the interior. She felt an instinctive pull toward it and decided to step inside, thinking she might rest a bit before continuing her journey. The familiar scent of coffee and baked goods welcomed her, bringing a sense of comfort she hadn't realized she needed. Behind the counter stood a man who looked about her age, with a friendly smile and an unhurried air. "Hello," he greeted her warmly, his tone open and genuine. "What can I get for you?" Maria hesitated, unsure if she wanted to share her current predicament, but something in his friendly demeanor put her at ease, and she managed a small smile. "Coffee," she said, her voice still shy, but with a little more certainty. "And just a little help," the man chuckled, sensing her embarrassment, but nodding kindly. "Sure thing," he replied, moving to prepare her coffee. He introduced himself as Tom, and as he worked, he asked gently, "Where are you headed?" "You seem a bit new around here." Maria's cheeks flushed, and she nodded, explaining in her limited English that she was a tourist, lost, and without her phone. Tom listened attentively, his brow furrowing slightly as he tried to piece together her words. "Lost, huh?" he echoed with a sympathetic smile. "Happens to the best of us. Let's see if we can get you sorted." He handed her the coffee and began sketching a map on a napkin, much like the barista from earlier, but with added details and landmarks. He explained each turn slowly, checking to make sure she understood. Maria followed his words as best she could, repeating them under her breath to commit them to memory. Tom sensed her struggle and paused, switching to simple, clear phrases. "It's okay," he reassured her. "Take it slow. You'll get there." Their interaction was brief, but as Maria thanked him and prepared to leave, Tom gave her a reassuring smile. "Don't worry too much. This city's big, but you'll find your way." His words lingered in her mind as she stepped back out into the street, his warmth leaving a mark that stayed with her long after. Following his directions, Maria felt each step become a bit easier. She repeated his words to herself, picturing the map he had drawn, her confidence slowly building with each landmark she recognized. For the first time since her arrival, she felt as though she wasn't completely alone in this overwhelming city. Maria's path led her through the streets with a new sense of purpose, each small success fueling her determination. She clutched Tom's napkin map, her fingers tracing each line and turn as she counted down the streets, feeling a thrill with every correct direction. The simple act of following his map felt like a victory, as though she was beginning to gain a foothold in this unfamiliar world. The afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the buildings, and as she walked, Maria took in her surroundings with fresh eyes. Each street corner and storefront felt less like obstacles and more like milestones, markers of her growing independence. She ventured further, testing her English by reading signs and muttering phrases to herself, her voice growing in confidence. At one point, she stopped at a crosswalk beside an older woman carrying several grocery bags. Maria's instinct was to stay silent, but a newfound courage urged her to reach out. "Do you need help?" she asked, her voice tentative but hopeful. The woman turned, surprised but smiling. "Thank you, dear, but I've got it," she replied warmly. Though the words were quick, Maria understood them, her heart leaping at the small success. She nodded, offering a smile in return, feeling a rush of pride at her ability to connect, even in such a simple way. Later, she passed by a street vendor selling books and decided to stop, browsing through the colorful covers. The vendor, noticing her interest, offered a recommendation, gesturing to a small paperback. "This one's popular," he said. Maria didn't understand every word, but she caught the main idea and nodded, examining the book in her hands. With a mix of gestures and simple words, she asked him for the price, feeling both nervous and exhilarated as she navigated the brief conversation. As she walked away, book in hand, Maria felt a growing sense of accomplishment. These weren't grand achievements, but they were hers, small moments that marked her progress and reminded her that learning a new language, a new way of life, was something she could conquer step by step. By late afternoon, Maria found herself at a park near her hotel. She sat on a bench, looking back over her day. Each small victory, each exchange and interaction, felt like proof that she could carve out a place for herself in this city. The loneliness and uncertainty of the morning had lessened, replaced by quiet resilience. She still had a long way to go, but with every step, she felt a little stronger, a little more capable. As she watched people pass by, speaking in the familiar yet incomprehensible hum of English, Maria felt a shift within herself. She no longer felt like a complete outsider. The city still held its mysteries and challenges, but now she saw it as a place full of opportunities to learn and grow. With her newfound confidence, she looked forward to whatever the next day would bring, ready to face it with a determination she hadn't known she had. The next morning, Maria set out with her notebook in hand, energized by the small victories of the previous day. Her destination was a bookstore she'd found on a tourist map, a place she hoped would offer language books or perhaps something simple to practice her English. She was determined to keep expanding her confidence bit by bit. As she walked through the city, Maria practiced her English silently, forming phrases and trying to remember the instructions she'd rehearsed. The streets were busy, and each corner brought a new wave of voices and sounds, many of which still felt out of reach. But today, she approached these sounds with more curiosity than fear. After a few blocks, she stopped in front of a flower shop. The display of colorful bouquets caught her eye, and she lingered, admiring the carefully arranged petals and the soft scent wafting into the street. Just as she was about to continue, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Oh, aren't they beautiful?" said an elderly woman who had appeared beside her. Maria turned, recognizing kindness in the woman's smile. She nodded, managing a soft, "Yes, very beautiful." The woman, Linda, introduced herself and started talking in a slow, gentle tone that Maria could mostly understand. Linda's manner was patient, and her words simple, as if sensing Maria's need for an unhurried pace. They began talking about flowers, with Linda explaining the names of various blooms in English, pausing to let Maria repeat each one. The exchange was small and informal, but for Maria, it was a revelation, a real conversation, one where she didn't feel rushed or overwhelmed. After a few minutes, Linda turned the conversation to Maria's background, asking where she was from and what had brought her to the city. Maria explained as best she could, mentioning her struggles with the language, her desire to explore, and her hopes of learning. Linda listened attentively, nodding and offering words of encouragement, praising Maria's bravery and determination. For the first time since arriving, Maria felt understood in a way that transcended words. Linda's patient listening and gentle explanations made her feel like she belonged, as if there were people in this vast city who could see beyond her halting English to the person she truly was. Before parting, Linda handed Maria a small rose from the shop's display, "A gift for a brave traveler," she said with a smile. Maria accepted it gratefully, her heart swelling with gratitude. She knew it was a simple gesture, but to her it felt like a bridge between her and this new world. With the rose in hand, she continued her journey to the bookstore, feeling a newfound warmth and confidence. With Linda's encouragement fresh in her mind, Maria arrived at the bookstore. Rows of shelves stretched before her, filled with books of every kind. She scanned the aisles, searching for something that might help with her English. As she walked through the sections, she felt a mix of excitement and intimidation. The store was larger than she'd expected, with books and signs all in English, each title an invitation to a world just beyond her grasp. At the back of the store, she noticed a young man flipping through a magazine. He looked up as she approached, catching her eye with a friendly smile. Looking for something, he asked in English. His accent was familiar, and Maria hesitated before responding, her words cautious. Yes. English for learning, she said, gesturing vaguely at the shelves. The young man's expression brightened. You're learning English? He asked, switching smoothly into Spanish. Relief flooded through Maria as she heard her native language. I'm Jorge, he introduced himself, extending a hand. Maria shook his hand gratefully, explaining her situation, her first time in the city, her struggles with the language, and her desire to find some resources to help her learn. Jorge nodded with understanding, his gaze sympathetic. He shared that he was an exchange student, originally from Mexico, who had also faced challenges when he first arrived. This city can feel overwhelming at first, he admitted, but with practice, it gets easier. I promise. His words were comforting, a reassurance from someone who truly understood what she was going through. Jorge guided her to a section of books designed for English learners, picking up a few titles he thought would be helpful. He explained each one in Spanish, describing how they could assist her with vocabulary, pronunciation, and basic grammar. They discussed their experiences, sharing stories of misunderstandings and awkward moments, both laughing at the small triumphs and setbacks they had encountered. As they talked, Maria felt a growing sense of camaraderie with Jorge. Here was someone who had walked a similar path, who knew the challenges and the victories of learning to navigate a new world. Their conversation, free from the struggle of translation, allowed Maria to share her journey openly, building a connection that felt genuine and sincere. Before parting, Jorge offered to meet up occasionally to practice English together. Maria accepted his offer with gratitude, recognizing how much this new friendship could mean. She was learning that each interaction, each person who helped her, was a step closer to finding her place in this city. As she left the bookstore, her heart felt lighter. The encounters with Linda and Jorge had given her something she hadn't realized she was missing, a sense of belonging. She was no longer a solitary traveler lost in an unfamiliar world. She was part of a community, connected by shared experiences and mutual kindness. With her new books in hand, Maria walked back toward her hotel, determined to study each page and remember each lesson. She was no longer simply a visitor. She was a student, a learner, and a friend. And as she walked, she looked forward to the new chapters of this journey, ready to face them with courage and an open heart. The next day, Maria awoke with renewed determination. She flipped through the pages of the language books Jorge had recommended, jotting down phrases and practicing pronunciation. Each new word felt like a building block, constructing a bridge between her and the city around her. With every line she read, she felt closer to a version of herself that could thrive in this place, not as a visitor, but as someone who belonged. Inspired by her progress, Maria decided it was time to explore the city on her own again. She reviewed the directions Jorge had shown her to a small neighborhood park where she planned to practice her English with strangers. The idea of talking to locals by herself was intimidating, but she reminded herself of Linda's kindness and Tom's encouragement. She felt ready. As she walked to the park, Maria repeated phrases under her breath, preparing herself for potential interactions. When she arrived, she took a deep breath, finding a bench near the path where families strolled and children played. It was a perfect place to observe, and she hoped to make small attempts at conversation. After a few moments, a young mother pushing a stroller approached and sat down beside her, offering Maria a friendly nod. Maria glanced at her mind racing through the phrases she had practiced. This was her chance. She took a steady breath and spoke. "Hello," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Is nice park?" The woman smiled, nodding. "Yes, it is. It's a great spot for the kids to play," she replied, and Maria caught the essence of her response. Though the words were fast, the woman didn't seem bothered by Maria's halting English and continued chatting, pointing out the playground and mentioning how often she came here. Maria listened intently, picking up familiar words and phrases. She nodded and smiled, and as the conversation flowed, she began to feel her initial nerves fading. For the first time, she felt like she was having a real exchange, piecing together her understanding through context and tone. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. After the woman left, Maria sat quietly, savoring the moment. It had been a simple interaction, yet it felt monumental. She realized that learning a language was more than memorizing words. It was about finding her voice, discovering the confidence to connect. This realization filled her with a sense of purpose and possibility. Encouraged by her morning, the park, Maria ventured further into the city, deciding to visit a popular open-air market. She had read about it in one of her books, and she looked forward to practicing her new vocabulary in a place where people shopped and chatted freely. The market was lively, filled with the scents of fresh fruit, flowers, and baked goods. Vendors called out to passers-by, their voices blending into a cheerful hum that felt welcoming yet overwhelming. Maria approached a fruit stand and picked up an apple, feeling her confidence swell as she prepared to speak. "How much?" she asked, lifting the apple to show the vendor. The vendor responded quickly, his words running together in a way that left Maria struggling to keep up. She caught a few numbers, but nothing clear enough to give her confidence. Flustered, she held out some cash, hoping it would cover the cost. The vendor took what he needed and handed her change, but Maria felt the sting of defeat. Moving on, Maria tried another stand, this time attempting a longer sentence. "I want to buy orange and bread," she said, her words halting but hopeful. The vendor misunderstood her request and handed her something different, leaving Maria feeling frustrated and self-conscious. She thanked him awkwardly and walked away, the excitement from earlier dimming as her confidence waned. The language barrier felt thicker here, the quick exchanges and local slang complicating her efforts. Discouraged, she found a bench near the market's edge, the weight of her struggles settling over her. Despite her efforts, she still felt like an outsider, stumbling through each interaction. She wondered if she would ever be able to communicate freely, if the day would come when she wouldn't have to struggle for each word. Just as she was about to leave, she saw a young girl approach her, holding out a small flower. "For you," the girl said in simple English, smiling shyly. Maria's heart lifted, and she accepted the flower with gratitude. "Thank you," she replied softly, smiling back. The gesture reminded her of Linda's rose, a small kindness that reminded her she was not alone in this journey. Her setbacks were real, but they were not the end. She decided to keep trying. The moments of connection, like the flower from the young girl, were what mattered. Each one, however small, was a victory, a reminder of her progress and the kindness that surrounded her. As she left the market, she held the flower close, determined to continue her journey with resilience and hope. Later that afternoon, Maria met Jorge at a small cafe they had agreed upon. The familiar surroundings and the promise of speaking in her native Spanish were a welcome reprieve. Jorge greeted her with a warm smile, and they found a cozy table in the corner, far from the bustle of other patrons. He noticed her tired expression and asked how her day had gone, his tone understanding. Maria explained her morning at the park and the later challenges at the market. Her voice softened as she described the sting of each misunderstanding, the difficulty of communicating even the simplest ideas. Jorge listened patiently, nodding as she shared her frustrations. "I've been there," he said, his voice gentle but certain. "When I first came here, every word felt like a mountain to climb, but you know what? With every misunderstanding, I learned something new. Every mistake brought me closer to understanding." His words resonated with Maria, filling her with a sense of kinship. They spent the next hour talking about their respective journeys, their shared challenges, and the small victories that kept them moving forward. Jorge shared stories of his early days as an exchange student, moments when he had mispronounced words or misunderstood simple instructions. His stories were both funny and comforting, a reminder that language barriers could be overcome one step at a time. Jorge offered to go over some new vocabulary with her, focusing on words and phrases that might be useful in the market or while exploring. They practiced together, with Jorge giving her tips on pronunciation and how to use context to pick up unfamiliar words. Maria felt herself relax, enjoying the rhythm of the conversation and the security of practicing with someone who understood. As they left the cafe, Jorge suggested they meet up once a week to practice English together. Maria agreed enthusiastically, grateful for the support and companionship. She realized that her journey didn't have to be a solitary one. With someone like Jorge by her side, the road ahead felt a little less daunting. The walk back to her hotel was different that day. With each step, Maria felt the weight of her isolation lifting. She had a friend, a confidant who understood her struggles and who was willing to help her grow. And for the first time since arriving, she felt like she was truly part of this city, no longer just a visitor passing through. Encouraged by her meeting with Jorge, Maria decided to push her limits the following day. She set out early, determined to put her new vocabulary to use. The confidence Jorge had instilled in her was like a steady flame, guiding her as she rehearsed her phrases along the way, visualizing successful interactions. She arrived at a busy plaza where vendors and locals gathered. The place buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the occasional music from street performers. Taking a steady breath, Maria approached a stand selling fresh flowers. She greeted the vendor with a polite good morning and proceeded with her request as she had practiced with Jorge. "I would like a small bouquet, please," she said, her voice a mix of nerves and anticipation. The vendor nodded, asking which flowers she preferred. Though she didn't understand every word, Maria caught the gist and pointed to a mix of roses and daisies. She listened carefully as he explained the price, managing to pay correctly and thank him with a genuine smile. This exchange, though simple, filled her with pride, a tangible result of her hard work. Emboldened, Maria continued through the plaza, stopping at different stands to test her English. She practiced buying a few snacks and even complimented a woman on her scarf, her words tentative but sincere. Each interaction brought a surge of confidence, and she found herself blending into the rhythm of the plaza, feeling less like an outsider and more like a participant in the city's daily life. Her confidence was soon put to the test when she overheard two people discussing directions nearby. They were talking quickly, and she strained to follow along, catching phrases like "turn left hand by the fountain." One of them noticed her listening and, realizing she seemed interested, offered to explain in simpler terms. Grateful for the chance to practice, Maria nodded, focusing intently as they repeated the directions. Though she stumbled over some phrases and needed clarifications, she managed to understand the basic route. She thanked them, feeling a sense of accomplishment that overshadowed her earlier struggles. As the day drew to a close, Maria returned to her hotel, her mind buzzing with the day's events. She felt an undeniable shift within herself, a new resilience, a confidence that wasn't tied to perfection, but to the courage to try. She was beginning to understand that language wasn't just a set of words, but a bridge, one she could build step by step. Maria fell asleep that night with a sense of peace, each small success replaying in her mind. The journey ahead was still long, but she knew she could face it. With George's support and her own growing confidence, she felt ready to continue this path embracing the beauty of learning and connecting with a world that had once felt so far away. The next morning, Maria set out feeling lighter than ever, each day in the city shaping her into someone braver and more resilient. She planned to revisit the market from a few days prior, this time confident that her recent successes would guide her. As she entered the lively space, her eyes swept over the vendors, the colors of fresh produce, and the bustling crowds. Approaching a stand selling baked goods, she rehearsed her order under her breath, prepared to ask for a small loaf of bread. But as she began her request, the vendor cut her off, speaking rapidly and gesturing impatiently. His hurried manner threw her off, and she stumbled over her words, her confidence unraveling. Trying to recover, she repeated herself, but he simply shook his head, moving on to the next customer. A familiar feeling of inadequacy washed over her, stinging sharper this time. She backed away from the stand, her cheeks burning with frustration and embarrassment. It was as if all her progress had vanished in a moment, leaving her exposed to the fears she thought she'd overcome. Despite her efforts, her voice felt small and clumsy here, like she was once again a stranger in her own story. She moved to a quiet corner of the market, fighting back tears. The setbacks of the past days, once manageable, felt insurmountable now. Her mind replayed each failed attempt, each misunderstanding, amplifying the doubt gnawing at her. Was she truly ready for this journey, or had she taken on something beyond her reach? After a few moments of letting the frustration settle, Maria noticed a young boy watching her from a nearby fruit stand. He waved shyly, offering a small, comforting smile. She managed a weak smile and returned the gesture, a reminder of Linda's rose and the flower the little girl had given her. They had been small moments of kindness, yet they had lifted her spirits when she needed it most. This memory, though faint, sparked a flicker of hope within her. Determined not to let a single experience define her day, Maria wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. She reminded herself that each setback was a step forward, an opportunity to learn. Gathering her courage, she resolved to stay a bit longer, to face her fear of failure and try again. The market was still buzzing, the energy vibrant and inviting, and she knew she wasn't ready to give up just yet. With a steadying breath, Maria walked back into the heart of the market, this time approaching a vendor with a gentler expression. She selected a small basket of strawberries and, with careful words, placed her order. The vendor smiled warmly, repeating her request slowly to confirm. The exchange, simple and ordinary, filled her with a renewed sense of strength. As she moved to the next stall, Maria felt a revelation forming within her. She realized that learning a language was not just about mastering words, but about finding the courage to connect, to allow herself to be vulnerable. The city was not her enemy. Rather, it was a vast network of people, each with their own stories, challenges, and kindnesses. She didn't need to conquer it. She only needed to connect with it, one conversation at a time. Filled with this realization, she decided to set a goal for herself, to embrace each day as an opportunity to build these connections, no matter how small. She would seek out moments of understanding, not just perfect sentences. Each interaction, successful or not, would be a step toward understanding this city, this language, and herself. With this new mindset, Maria spent the next hour exploring the market, allowing herself to make mistakes and laugh at them. She purchased small items, practiced greetings with vendors, and even asked for cooking tips on a local dish. Her interactions were not flawless, but they were real, and each one made her feel more connected to the world around her. When she finally returned to her hotel that evening, Maria felt a sense of peace. Her experiences at the market, both challenging and uplifting, had shown her the importance of resilience. She was beginning to understand that setbacks were not failures, but necessary steps in her journey. They were reminders that learning, true, meaningful learning, was about embracing each moment, both the triumphs and the struggles. With this renewed purpose, she resolved to continue this journey with open eyes and an open heart, to see each day as an opportunity to learn, to connect, and to grow. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time she felt ready to face it, to welcome it, and to make it her own. With each passing day, Maria found herself more at ease in the city. Her encounters became less about survival and more about genuine curiosity. She sought out familiar places, the market, the park, and small shops where she practiced her English with increasing confidence. But there was one place she felt particularly drawn to revisit, the cozy cafe where she had first met Tom. As she walked through the cafe doors, a wave of warmth and nostalgia washed over her. Tom was behind the counter, just as he had been that first day, and when he saw her, he greeted her with the same friendly smile. "Back again?" he asked with a hint of surprise. Maria returned his smile, feeling a mixture of gratitude and pride as she ordered confidently, her words flowing more naturally than ever. Tom handed her a coffee and invited her to sit for a moment, curious to hear about her journey since they last met. She told him about her experiences in the city, the setbacks, the friendships, and the small victories that had shaped her time here. As they talked, Tom listened attentively, nodding with understanding. He complimented her on her progress, noting how far she had come since that first day. Maria thanked him, explaining how his kindness had given her the encouragement she needed to persevere. For her, this cafe and Tom's friendship had become symbols of her growth, reminders of the journey she had traveled within herself. Before she left, Tom handed her a small notebook, a gift he'd chosen for her. "For all the words and stories you're yet to find," he said with a smile. Maria held it tightly, deeply moved by his gesture. This notebook felt like a new beginning, a place to capture her thoughts, struggles, and triumphs as she continued to explore this language and her new world. Leaving the cafe, Maria felt a mix of joy and sadness. She knew she might never see Tom again, but his kindness and encouragement would remain with her. She held the notebook close, filled with gratitude for the small moments that had brought her this far. On her final day in the city, Maria woke early, determined to savor every moment. She reviewed her route to the places she had grown fond of: the park, the market, and the cafe. She wanted to leave feeling fully present, to take in every detail that had once seemed so foreign. As she walked, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Each step through the city was a reminder of how far she had come, not just geographically, but emotionally. She thought back to her first days here, the overwhelming uncertainty that had once held her back, and smiled at the memory. She was no longer that uncertain visitor. She had become someone who could navigate this place, someone who could connect and communicate. Her final stop was the park. Sitting on her favorite bench, she reflected on the lessons this city had taught her. She understood now that language was more than just words. It was about connection, resilience, and finding common ground with others. She had come here to learn a language, but what she had gained was far greater. She had discovered a strength within herself, an ability to adapt, and an openness to new experiences. As she rose to leave, Maria felt a bittersweet ache in her heart. This city had become a part of her, shaping her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had arrived as a visitor, but she was leaving with memories, friendships, and a sense of belonging that would stay with her forever. The journey back to her hotel was quiet, each step a farewell. Her mind was filled with thoughts of Linda's kindness, George's friendship, and Tom's encouragement, small moments that had created lasting connections. She felt ready to return home, to carry forward the lessons she had learned and to keep growing. With her suitcase packed and her heart full, Maria took one last look at the city from her hotel window. She knew that this was not the end of her journey, but the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with curiosity, confidence, and the understanding that she could find her way anywhere.